Watermelon, white melon and pumpkin, 3 names of 3 villages that form an innovative public-private partnership to cut poverty here in China.
But this is not a story about picking watermelons. This is an investigation into how the Chinese government is trying to use private companies innovatively to eradicate poverty in the hardest to reach rural areas, and whether there are lessons to be learned for other parts of the world. I'm Ryder. I've been working on the question of how people can best lift themselves out of poverty for close to 20 years now, including the last 5 years in China. That's why I've come to investigate what's happening in Sanghua. Translated as Three Melon Community, it's in Anhui Province in eastern China and covers an area of just under 1,300 hectares. To put that in context, that's roughly double the size of the Kibera Sum in Kenya, Africa's largest informal urban settlement. And like Kenya, China has struggled to eradicate poverty in some difficult areas. So China's trying a new innovative approach, including using private money. Around the world, there are still over 700 million people living in extreme poverty, the majority of those being in African countries, including Kenya, where I was born, and 16 million now in rural areas in China. Over the years, there have been some really interesting and innovative initiatives created to cut rural poverty, including national projects like India's scheme to create housing for all rural poor in the 80s, and projects delivered by charities and individuals, like the famous Grameen project in Bangladesh, initiated by Nobel laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus, which brought rural communities together to loan each other money. At the time, these projects were thought to be innovative because they were not just building new hospitals or schools or helping people farm better. They were building much-needed infrastructure or helping kickstart new businesses. At the same time, they've nearly all relied on the idea of the government or charities giving out money. What if there was another further innovation? Harnessing private companies, less government or charity handouts and more profit-driven. In this context, the Three Melon Community is an intriguing case. Back in 2015, annual per capita income of the villagers living in Three Melon Community was less than $500. That's just over $1.25 a day, the international threshold for extreme poverty at the time. That made it poor, though by no means the poorest in China. But by 2017, that daily income had risen to $38 a day, and it had supposedly been achieved by a private company wanting to make a profit. But how? Hey, excuse me,
Yeah?
Are you a tourist?
Yes, I'm a visitor here.
Great, could I join you?
Of course.
Thank you.
Shall we go?
Yes, let's go.
All right, so what brings you to Three Melon Community?
I'm a city man and I love traveling in the countryside.
Well, it looks like a very authentic experience. I've been going into all of the little buildings and they show a picture of what the building used to look like and how it's been renovated now.
Three Melon Community is actually a very new community, an artificial construct invented in 2015, directly taking in 3 villages but covering another 12. It was a brainchild of a private company called Huaishang, who normally make profit by building and running restaurants and hotels, and they teamed up with the local government who wants to eradicate poverty. All across China, local governments are teaming up with private companies, community groups and farmers. The details can get a bit complicated, but the principle behind them all is, where governments and charities often see poverty and problems, private companies see business opportunities. But what the private companies often lack is money to get it all started, so local governments agree to invest some, even half, sometimes, the money the company needs. The idea is that the business opportunities will bring jobs and eradicate poverty.
I'm having tea with Mr. Chung, the original village chief before this project began. He now lives here in one of 7 rural restaurants and 6 boutique hotels that were created to bring tourists in. He's one of 200 local employees that form part of a 300-strong operational team getting things done here every day. I wanted to ask him what his fellow villagers thought about what had happened since the project began. 一开始村民是怎么想的？
这公司局部进入讨论以后，组织我们村民代表、村民小组组长100多人到江苏参观学习。回来以后，我们都同意了。
但是你们的家人他们现在不在这儿，他们在哪儿？
一个在天津，一个在潮活。
为什么？
What Mr. Chung went on to tell me was that when the project was initiated, the government also tried another way to eradicate rural poverty, getting the villagers to move to cities and giving each person apartments of 65 square meters if they wanted. Many decided to move, meaning that while in 2015 there were 2,100 local villagers here, now there are a lot less, just 600. So what do those villagers do here? What are the projects that private companies in the Three Melon Community have started and the local government has supported? The first one is tourism.
So what would you recommend as the best tourist activity here?
I think the hot spring here is very good. I think you can have a try.
Okay, sounds good. Next stop. If you've lived in China over a winter period, you'll know that hot springs are a really popular activity. The Three Melon Community attracted over 7 million tourists in 2018, and part of that was to come to this hot spring, which I'm in right now. The project included renovating these springs because it would help attract those tourists and also manage the seasonality of tourism.
Parts of China are getting rich while other parts are staying poor. So how do you get the rich parts to help the poor part? Well, one solution is tourism. The rich people literally spend their money in the poor communities. The China National Tourism Association estimates that China's domestic tourists made 2.5 billion trips to internal rural areas in 2017, and in total generated $240 billion in revenues. Here in Three Melon Community, they got under 1% of the share of the rural tourists and revenues, but it's been enough to attract people who had previously left the village to open new tourist-facing businesses. The kind of people with skills that villagers need to get out of poverty.
I'm back walking around the little shops, which seem to be mostly run by women. I've been told that traditional snacks are the most popular product from the tourists, and this woman here, Mrs. Zhou, sells them. She came back from Tianjin after 10 years of living there to contribute to this economy. 为什么你回来了？
因为相关公司的政策好啊，给我们这个房租都免了，水电都免了，所以在家里照顾孩子都方便了，所以就选择在家里。
Now, if tourism is one business opportunity for the private sector that can lift people out of poverty, e-commerce is another.
E-commerce is Three Melon Community's largest earner, and that's because of this. This is the e-commerce centre. It was created in 2015 and since then has attracted different e-commerce platforms from Alibaba to JD and many others that are really popular across China, but you've never heard of them. I've been speaking to Peng Peng, who's been here since 2017. He came here after 14 years of working in other cities and is now trying to contribute to his hometown. He's been speaking to me about the progress and challenges that he's faced. Peng Peng, 你的最大的挑战是什么？
对我们来说，目前最大的挑战大概有2点。第一点就是那个人才的挑战，因为对我们来说，因为这里是属于农村嘛，就很多人喜欢在城市里面去生活、去工作，在我们这里可能会缺少一些人才。第二就是平台方，因为平台在不断的变革升级啊，所以我们也就需要很多的挑战去学习这些东西。所以这个是我们目前的。
Peng Peng's story is not unique. E-commerce is often seen as a great way to spread China's wealth from its richest areas to its poor areas. There's been a lot of attention on the 780 Taobao villages initiated by well-known global entrepreneur Jack Ma and his company Alibaba. Three Melon Community is not a Taobao village, but the idea is the same. The people in poor areas will be able to reach rich customers far away through the internet. The problem is it's really hard to find the local talent who are web savvy, and competition is fierce between the rural communities from all over China trying to sell often very similar products to their rich consumers. But there might be an even bigger problem. E-commerce means people can now sell their stuff online, but they can now also buy more stuff online. In fact, in 2017, rural consumers bought more than 5 times the amount they sold. Remember I mentioned the Grameen Loans project from Bangladesh? Well, even though it was an innovative idea too, just like e-commerce, some people also ended up spending up more than they earned with their new mini businesses. After a few days in Three Melon Community, talking to various business people, government officials and villagers, it seems obvious to me that poverty has been reduced in a very innovative way. But there are some issues we shouldn't ignore. The first is that with 2/3 of villagers leaving, it's really hard to know if the public-private partnership has helped everyone, or just the 600 people who stayed. We don't have the data on the people that left. Second, while some people are benefiting from e-commerce like Peng Peng, it's not easy to make it work, and there are issues around e-commerce encouraging some people to spend more money than they have. And lastly is an issue I've seen with many so-called innovative poverty reduction projects across the world. They can seem great at first, but problems only become apparent 10 or 20 years later. So it might still be too early to judge. But are there, nevertheless, lessons for the rest of the world?
Huashan Group have so far invested over $120 million into this project, and as you can see, it's still a work in progress. The government has contributed the other 50%, but there's going to be much more to do. At the same time, they're already sharing the results of it with others. Professor Chen is a head of an academy created to do just that. The project is meant to be sustainable within 10 years. Is it realistic? 10年是实现吗
？10年实现回收是我们的一个目标，而且我们希望能够提前实现。那之所以有这样的一个目标的话呢，是因为我们三瓜公社它作为一个乡村项目，它的产业的路径叫三旅结合，所以乡村旅游是我们的一部分收入，但是更重要的是通过商品的开发以及对粉丝的运营所带来的更没有边界的一个收入。
但是关心是什么呢？
关键是在这个过程当中，我们需要的是三瓜公社这个品牌以及一批喜欢三瓜公社的粉丝跟我们在一起。那么深度的运营以及强大的一支运营团队是非常重要的。所谓深度的运营，也就是基于粉丝的需求、用户的需求所进行的，在三瓜场景上面所开发的各类产品、创意活动以及对活动的执行。那么以及呢，就是我们的整个服务的支撑。
Professor Chen's job is to monitor and share the results of this project with others here in China. But I can't help thinking how this project could be applicable to African countries where less than 400 million people are still in poverty. This ambitious development project has got a totally different mindset to rural development projects that we've seen before implemented, where we've seen inputs into education, health, increasing agricultural yields, but those projects have had mixed results. Now the results of this project are still unclear. But with trends like upper and middle class consumption rising in Africa, e-commerce, digitalization, surely this kind of model is also worth experimenting and adapting with.